Hey there riders, Journo Kris here today. I'm here with the Kawasaki KLX230SM. Thanks to MotoHUB in Castle Hill, they've lent me my demo bike while I get my 401 serviced. And I thought I'd give you a quick impression of what I've thought about spending, a good part of a day on this particular bike. Now, I guess a couple of the things that stand out in my mind is, first off, the handling, really strong point. It's got a nice brake and suspension setup overall. The engine, while quite a limiting factor with under 20 horsepower, it has enough go in it that you can have some fun as a more experienced rider, and it'll no doubt be a great power plant for beginner riders who are, entering their motorcycling journey and have nothing to kind of base their experience on. So they're building up their skills. And I would also say, if anything, having very limited power will make you a better rider in the long term, because you've got to be a lot more active with the gearbox. You've got to keep your momentum up. You've got to be careful how you use your brakes and how you upshift and downshift and how you sit in a gear where perhaps you shouldn't be, all that kind of stuff. So in some ways, I think this is the perfect beginner Supermoto. But there are some limiting factors, and certainly the price on this particular machine, I believe that it was 8.7 on the Kawasaki website for my postcode in Sydney, and that's quite pricey, I would say. I do think that when you look at this bike and kind of what's on offer, it is on the more basic end of what you'd expect in the 300 to 400cc category for a similar kind of price, and as a result, I think the pricing in this bike is probably that one area where I go, it should be lower. But otherwise, it's a great overall package, which has a lot to offer to someone who wants a Supermoto, but isn't, absolutely set on an extreme performance Supermoto. They want something that's quite easy to get started on. You've got all of kind of the advantages of a naked bike in a nice upright seating position, easy going in that, but a sharper handling package overall, and certainly a much lighter package than what you'll get in the 300 to 400cc kind of category, with this being only 135 kilos, fueled, ready to go. That's really nice and light. Somewhat offset by the 845mm seat height, which is a little bit taller, but the bike is super narrow, very well balanced, and quite an easy machine to jump onto, I will say. Okay, so the air-cooled engine. 20 horsepower, 19 horsepower, you need to keep it in the power band to get the most out of this engine, and if you do so, it's quite rewarding. It's quite a fun thing to ride. There is generous performance, enough for general road use, but I would certainly say it's probably going to appeal to somebody who doesn't want to break the speed limit all that often. You could certainly do so 60 and 80 zones, but generally speaking, I think this is very much a restrained kind of power plant. It's got a 6-speed gearbox, which is a little clunky first to second, but otherwise quite smooth. Gives you a nice spread of power. The torque is, and the pickup is decent if you're not in the power band. But generally speaking, if you want drive, you want to keep it in that kind of media part of the rev range. I found the throttle really nice and smooth. However, as I was coming back into town and I'd filled it up with fuel, it's almost like a hunting kind of thing, where it's just hitting that engine braking while you're just, what you feel like is just riding along at a very set speed. Now, I didn't actually experience that in any of my riding except for this short little section on the way back. And it's possible it's just because when I was riding the bike a little bit more aggressively, that wasn't an issue at all. And I think riding the bike aggressively is what you're going to be doing on this machine. The exhaust is very quiet, at idle, a little bit of a putt-putt to it. Start her up. And I guess most of the engine sound is like a mechanical kind of sound. There's certainly no intake roar or anything like that with this particular engine. And it's kind of utilitarian. It's a bit of a tractor-like kind of single, and it is what it is. It's a good enough engine that I wouldn't mind starting on this, and I think I'd have some fun. But certainly it's quite down on power versus all the 300 to 400cc options that you'd normally see in the regular road bikes. But it does more align with like the 250cc dual sports or off-roaders, I guess. 17-inch wheels, pretty cool to see. It's got, a fairly regular front, quite a narrow rear, and a single disc on the front, a nice big 300mm disc. The very narrow tires certainly help with the, sumo geometry to give this bike a very aggressive handling characteristic. It'll turn on a dime. It's a really fun thing to ride. It's a fun thing to kind of, like smash through the corners and everything like that. And it's just incredibly agile. So in that side of things, that's really something that counts towards the bike and is very sumo. You've got USD forks on it, which is an update over the 230S. And that's very necessary because that's actually quite a powerful front brake, and you would be like, it's a well supported front end. You wouldn't want any more basic a suspension setup on the front because you'd be getting massive dive. The overall suspension setup is quite supple, so it's good for, pretty varied conditions. Our roads aren't great here in New South Wales, and I found it quite comfortable today. The front end was really faultless. The rear, the harder edged bumps, the sharper bumps, those still did, transfer through. But overall, I thought the ride itself was exceptional and quite well kind of put together, quite well balanced, I guess you'd say, for a fairly basic setup really. There's no adjustability on those forks, and there's only preload adjustability at the rear, and I'd probably mess around with that preload to try and soften up that rear a little bit more, I think, to see whether that might make it, or possibly, put a little bit more tension into it and see if that helps with those harsher bumps. But realistically speaking, in this kind of category of bike, I think the suspension is well within reason for me at 70, 75 kilos. As far as the controls, fairly light clutch. Really, I'd never thought about it until I thought, I should probably mention that just now. Non-adjustable levers on both sides. There's not a heap of bite on that front brake, but it is quite powerful, and with the bike being so light, you really do notice that. And you can trail it right into the corner. Nice, easy transition on and off. The fact that there's not a lot of bite, I think, definitely helps there, and is going to be preferred for most new riders while it is backed up by ABS. So you do have the safety of ABS, which is a general requirement these days, so it's not like you can buy a bike without it, but it is there, something that's good for new riders and really for experienced riders as well. Really simple dash, LED headlight, fairly old school indicators, which are a bit on the ugly side. It's a little bit busy under here as far as the brackets and things like that, but nothing that I'd be complaining about personally owning one of these bikes. The plastics, everything looks really nice, from a meter or two away. The edges of the plastics are a little bit rough, but I would say, the build quality is pretty typical of kind of like almost a dirt bike side of things. So maybe not quite at the same level of quality as Kawasaki's road bikes like the Ninja 400, but certainly still well within reason. So yeah, quite nice overall. And the styling of the bike does look, to my eye, nice with that tall front guard. It's got quite an aggressive kind of contour to it. Round mirrors, meh, but they give good vision. Really simple switch blocks, and they're just the basic switch blocks with these quite wide bars. I mean, as far as the ergonomics, I'll jump on the bike and give you a look. So as you can see here, I'm a 32-inch inseam, 180 centimeters, and that 845mm seat height works pretty much perfectly for me. I get both feet down flat. I'm just in a regular kind of riding boot. That seating position, the seat to peg ratio, I feel like those pegs are a little bit higher and maybe a little bit further forward, which is giving kind of that almost 90-degree angle at the knee, and a little bit of a downward, I guess, angle on my legs, but certainly it's an engaged seating position between the seat and the pegs, and a little bit shorter than I almost would have expected. And there's not a huge reach to those bars either, as you can see here, and they're quite a wide bar when you're sitting on the bike. The actual bike itself is quite low in this section here, down at your legs, which I think helps with that feeling of real lightness. And certainly the bike does feel exceptionally light, so that is really nice to see as far as kind of like the new rider perspective. Jumping on and off for me is quite easy, but again, 32-inch inseam. I'm not super short or super tall. I think I'm pretty average. Room for a pillion, so that is something worth mentioning, but I would not buy this bike if I was planning on doing heaps of two-up riding. And what else is there? What else is there to mention? Overall, it's a really cool, fun package. I guess my overall takeaway with the KLX230SM is just the simple fact that it is a fun machine, it's agile, it is, it's got that real sumo feel to it, nicely set up suspension overall. I guess me, 70 to 80 kilos, and anyone similar will probably find that, like a good setup, a good solid setup, not too many complaints, unless the roads are really, really poor. Nice handling characteristic, it's aggressive but fairly predictable. It's a little bit light on that front end at very low speeds, but once you get moving, there's good stability and the bike feels just a lot more stable overall. And certainly through the corners on the side of the tire and everything like that, really, really good stability there too, and very predictable. It'll just turn on an absolute dime if you're getting a little bit of input in, whether that's like body input or a bit of bar input, and you can tighten up those corners like nothing else. So it's very forgiving in that regard, as long as you've got the skills to tighten it up. So for a new rider, I guess, being an aggressive handler may be a little bit of a learning curve, particularly with that taller seat height, but light machine, really easy handler, goes where you look, really very little to complain about. My one complaint is that these are almost 9 grand.
And that's really where the rub is. Now, I'm notoriously cheap, and I may be a bit out of touch with value and pricing, always a super subjective area. So while I'd say I really liked and had fun on the KLX230SM, I'd expect it to be around the 7 grand mark right away, give or take $500 here in Australia. Maybe that's wildly unrealistic, but my points of comparison are the DRZ400SM when it was available, and just the 3 to 400cc category in general, where 8K gets you a lot more if you don't want a Supermoto specifically. Now, as a rider, I don't have to worry about the realities of production, supply chain, etc. when I say this, but I'd say the KLX230SM would be bloody brilliant if priced at, say, 6.5, pretty amazing at or near 7K, and by 8K is struggling versus the competition, in my mind at least. I paid basically 7K for a run-out Sparkhill and 401, keep in mind, and that is an enormous value proposition right there. Sure, Sumos are cool, and sure the DRZ400SM is holding its value ridiculously second-hand, but it's got double the power and is a weapon that will thrill even experienced riders. The KLX230SM doesn't have that performance edge, and while fun, it's more beginner-centric and definitely more utilitarian. Playing devil's advocate, an extra set of wheels will set you back $1 grand plus tyres, and most dirt bikes you'd want the suspension done for a firmer road setup, so doing a conversion even on a cheap second-hand road registerable off-roader or dual purpose is going to cost you. So maybe that's where the KLX230SM will win out, being rideable off the showroom floor for a new rider ready to go and in a package that'll be great to learn on.
So that's my overall thoughts on the bike. I've just spent the day with it. If you've got any questions or that you think there's anything I've missed that maybe I can clarify for you, just let me know down below in the comments. I'll do my best to do that. You can demo ride this bike at MotoHUB at Castle Hill, or just go in and check one out if you're interested, have a sit on it and see how you feel about it. I'd probably recommend doing that if it does kind of catch your eye, or you're looking for a new bike and you're kind of interested, and they've got the rest of the Kawasaki range there as well. So that's me for now. Have a great one, stay safe out there, thanks for watching, and don't forget to sub and hit that like button.